Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Deadliest Warrior podcast. This week, we will be covering Season 1, Episode 2, Samurai vs. Viking. I'm your host, Matt Davis, joined by my lovely co-hosts,
Lucas from Green Dice Games, back at it.
And
Craig Taylor.
Nice. And this week on the show, we have a special guest, Brendan.
Hello, my name is Brendan Scholart, and I am here as a special guest.
Now, Brendan is on specifically because, for as long as I've known him, Brendan is a supporter of the Viking. Is that correct, Brendan?
This is true.
Everything the Vikings have ever done,
Yeah.
Brendan supports.
Every village they've ever raided, every child they've ever killed.
I take on all that moral...
It's blown out of proportion.
Right. Well, we're, of course, talking about the episode. And one of the best things about Deadliest Warrior is when your team loses and you get really, really pissed off about it. None
of us are known for doing that, though, as far as I know.
We've all had that experience, and it's only right that we bring on Brendan here so he can get some of his frustrations and angst out to the world.
Didn't we call that the grievance relievance?
I think one of us called it that, but all right. So to get us kickstarted here is a little bit of an icebreaker. I want to know, do you guys have any memory of watching this episode when it came out and who you were rooting for?
Yeah. This is actually the first episode I think I watched.
Oh.
I rooted for the samurai because I watched anime.
I suspect there's a lot of people out there that watch Dragon Ball Z and Samurai Jack, and that was hell yeah.
Yeah. And this was, I think, my. If I didn't watch this episode, I probably wouldn't be here today. I might be in a better place.
Off the top of my head, this episode I really did not remember it very much, but assuming knowing me, picking, Spartan and Gladiator, I probably would have favored the Viking as a kid.
Yeah,
which is what I'm here today.
The more brutish warrior kind of thing. Brendan, I kind of spoiled who you favored in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Viking with the head of hockey hair.
Oh, nice.
So do you really think, rather than just you liking the Viking, you were adamant that this is a match that he would have won, you think?
Yeah, I do believe that.
Okay, which I imagine we'll get into. It's kind of the whole point of the
Of
podcast.
Of course. And as for me, I remember when I initially watched, I was rooting for the Viking because I thought they were cool. And as the years went on, I remembered this episode but didn't rewatch it a whole bunch. And I became a big fan of samurais. I thought they were cool. And upon rewatching this episode, I'm still a fan of the samurai, but I have some opinions after rewatching this on who I think should have won. So we'll get into it. So first things first, let's introduce these warriors. We got the samurai, and I wrote their personal stats down because particularly interesting this episode, very big size difference in the warriors. So I noticed the samurai is 5'3" and 135 pounds, whereas the Viking is 5'11" and 180. It's the measurement difference between me and my mother, I think. Which in a fight of melee weapons mostly is, I think, a pretty significant advantage. But samurais are represented by, first and foremost, Tetsuro Shigematsu, who they introduce as a master of Kyudo, Japanese Zen archery, and a direct descendant of a samurai clan. Tetsuro is definitely the standout expert of the episode, but I wouldn't say it's in the same kind of positive way as Snake Block. Well, maybe Snake Blocker is not the best.
He has more gone with Snake Blocker than any other.
Tetsuro manages, he embodies everything that's kind of almost annoying about the experts in one total package.
So in real life, I do believe I couldn't confirm this, but Tetsuro says he's a direct descendant of a samurai clan. In the aftermath of this episode, he says it was his great-great-grandfather who served as a samurai. I'm just going to take him on face value for that because honestly, it doesn't really matter that much, right? I mean, if you're a descendant, right? Like, my grandma says we got an ancestor that fought in the Battle of Gettysburg. That that doesn't make me an expert on what happened there. Like, it's fine. Now, the Japanese Zen archery claim, a little more shady. I'm gonna get into that in a second. So in real life, Tetsuro is a playwright, a performer, a comedian, and a Canadian radio broadcaster. He's a pretty successful entertainer. He has Japanese parents. He himself was born in England and grew up in Canada and is a Canadian citizen today. The archery claim. I'm pretty sure it's a fabrication. So we found a wonderful video on YouTube by a channel called New Sensei. That's Nusensei. New Sensei, I believe, is like an archery channel, and he covered a bunch of Deadliest Warrior episodes.
Yeah. Well, so do you want to cover that in the archery section of the demonstration, or do you want to do it? Do you think
yeah, we can save it for the archery section.
I'd say just leave it for right now.
Yeah.
His claims might be a little bit bogus.
Yeah, right. Maybe we'll get into it later. If you want to read up more about Tetsuro, he's pretty out there. You can find out more about him on Wikipedia, IMDb. He's got a website, shiggy.com, and he's done a lot of interviews. You can watch his TED Talk on YouTube if you want to.
Shiggy.com.
Yeah, because Shigematsu, I think he's got a nickname, Shiggy. So he's probably playing a character in this episode, I imagine, because he doesn't come off as such a big jerk in like his interviews and stuff.
Yeah. Do you think, thinking about him now, that he's part of a separate classification of Deadliest Warrior expert, where you have, there's not a classification for actual experts. There is either actors or resume builders who apply. They have just like a mile long all the different things that they do in vain of Snake Blocker.
I would say there's a third category that only a couple guys fall into, which is like guys who work on the show,
Yeah.
like Barry Jacobson and Kieran Elliott.
Yeah.
But yeah, he would be a fourth kind of expert, right? Like he's sort of a resume builder. He sort of is in that category. But what would you classify him as, Craig?
Probably that type of Snake Blocker-esque human being. Just based on your description and a little bit of research that I did. Yeah, it's just, I don't know how you could be a bona fide samurai expert and be a radio host and be a TED Talker.
Right.
And
it should be said that in any interview or talk I saw about him, he didn't talk about like the samurai or anything like that.
Anything I looked up, I didn't see any like, formal samurai like history training or anything under his name. I mean, I think he was just kind of an actor. And he like bit down really hard on that part because he almost comes off as like a bit obnoxious.
You would think that his TED Talk was how to use Bushido in the workplace, like how to Bushido your boss or something like that. But it's nothing to do with.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with any of that. The second samurai expert is Brett Chan. So Brett Chan is introduced as a stuntman and 4-time martial arts black belt. And he showcased his skills in the Last Samurai movie. Like that, they did that. They're like, yeah, we know about the samurai because of that movie. So we'll mention that Brett was in there.
They give him the weapons expert title too, which is like the generic title they give like the secondary guy who like has really nothing to do with a samurai, but they just call them a weapons expert.
Yeah, they pretty much give that title to like
anyone.
Yeah. So Brett Chan is a prolific stunt performer. He's been in numerous shows and movies, including The Last Samurai. On his website, brettchanstunts.com, he does claim to have 30 years experience of martial arts in several disciplines. He's a 7th degree in Shotokan Karate, Muay Thai, Krav Maga, Kung Fu, Kali, Taekwondo, and kickboxing. And the reason I cite all that is because this show, I think this is the 3rd episode in a row they've claimed someone is a multi-black belt. Brett is the only believable one that's been introduced so far, although it was probably Michael in the first episode.
Yeah.
He seems like he probably has at least one black
He knows
belt.
something.
Yeah. I couldn't confirm whether he's got 4 different black belts, but I mean, he's got it on his website. So
Got some moves.
Yeah, he's got some moves. He's pretty jacked. He seems very professional, I guess, is what I was getting at.
I mean, according to his IMDb, he was the stunt coordinator for Nacho Libre.
Yeah, and
I did not know that. It's a fun fact. That's how they should have introduced
Oh, I love that.
like
put
the
that.
Deadliest Warrior, but they're introduced by their like most embarrassing credit.
From Nacho Libre.
Stunt coordinator.
What is years of experience too? Like 30 years of experience. How old is that guy on the show? Probably like in his 30s. Like I took karate for a year. I didn't learn shit. Do I have 1 year experience in like karate? Like I couldn't do a single move, but
well, he does make a living doing it, I guess,
I
on
know.
screen.
Yeah, I'm
so-
sure he has. I'm just being mean.
So, in the show, they say that samurai were the servants of the nobility and the bodyguards for their daimyo, which is sort of like Japan's feudal lords. And that dying in combat serving his master was the best possible fate he could embrace. So, Craig, I want to kick it over to you for a samurai introduction here. Who were the samurai and what did they do?
Sure. So, unlike the ninja, which I researched in our first episode, a lot of what is believed about the samurai is actually true. So that was refreshing. Although a lot of Western books and documentaries have kind of warped the perception of things like Bushido and the samurai personality. So the earliest of what could be considered a samurai came around in about the 600s. So that's where we see stuff like, this is sort of the beginnings of what became the samurai. And samurai, as we know it, began about 1185. And they lasted until about the Meiji Restoration, which is a pretty interesting time for the Japan as well as samurai. So I'll talk a little bit about it. Japan's history is divided into different periods, like the Edo period, Sengoku period, and Meiji Restoration. And it was a time where it's the transition from what could be considered ancient to the modern era. And this is where swords and carrying a sword is outlawed. And, for most people besides police officers. And a lot of samurai were trying to kind of find where they belonged in a world that's evolving around them. What place do they have in this, more modern Japan? So oddly enough, in reading about this, it reminded me a lot of like Red Dead Redemption is kind of what I kept thinking about, because it's one of the main themes in that game is
The West is dying.
yeah. So a lot of, I think, analogs to the Old West and cowboys and that transition from like old America to new America. So pretty interesting time. A lot of samurai felt lost, and the katanas were eventually outright banned following World War II, probably because the reparations, I guess. They banned all katanas, so that was for sure the end of samurai. Some other interesting things about the samurai is they weren't just limited to the Japanese. There are stories of Westerners, like there were English and Dutch that were samurai, as well as Yasuke, the African samurai. So kind of a famous edge
Interesting.
case. So I was surprised by that, knowing how people describe Japanese culture as kind of insular, that something as strict as samurai code would allow an outsider to become one, but apparently not. So
That's actually really cool. I didn't know that.
yeah. And so Bushido's kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about, because it's a big part of who the samurai are.
Yeah.
So the term Bushido did not exist until the Edo period, which was one of the last stages of the samurai, which started in 1603. So if you're talking not even like the beginnings of samurai, whenever samurai as we know it began in 1185, that's 500 years after the samurai began is where you start hearing the term Bushido. And the reason for that is the Edo period was a very prosperous time in Japanese history. And so there was sort of a splinter in the samurai community, if you could call it that, where there were some old school samurai who wanted to go back to the old ways and were frustrated by what they saw, and new school samurai who didn't necessarily follow that code of ethics. So the old samurai kind of adopted this Bushido as like, this is like the OG way of doing things. And so that's where that term kind of came from. You hear about Bushido and you think 1185, someone's handing out Bushido handbooks. Like, if you want to be a samurai, this is what you got to study. But it's more of a description of what used to be what was thought to be the common code of ethics for a samurai.
Okay.
And there was a book, what kind of ended up, I guess, bastardizing our understanding of it was a book by a guy named Nitobe Inazo. So he was the son of a samurai, but was very fond of Western culture, became a Christian, and he became a diplomat for Japan. And his way of making the samurai and Japanese history more palatable for Western audiences was to write a book called Bushido, the Soul of Japan. And that compared them a lot to knights and chivalry. And that's where a lot of people kind of think, oh, these are just Eastern knights. But it's not exactly analogous. And a lot of Japan at the time kind of rejected that book. And a lot of people think it's sort of misrepresenting a lot of the facts. So that understanding comes a lot from that guy and that book. But yeah, that's kind of what for my research. One last thing I'll mention just from the show. One thing they claim along with what you said is Tetsuro says failure is not an option for the samurai, which could be said about literally every single warrior on the show. I just thought that was really silly. So,
right. Yeah, when death is the stake of failure. Like, well, I have some questions layered in here that I'm sure we'll circle back on some things for you. So for now, let's get into the Viking. So as I said, the Viking is labeled as 5'11" and 180 pounds. The first Viking expert is Casey Hendershot, who they introduce as a professional stuntman and world-class expert with the Viking longsword. Now, Casey, I saw, is a stuntman for a number of movies and TV shows. You can easily find him on IMDb. As far as being a world-class expert with the Viking longsword, it's most likely that he just did some consulting for a movie and Deadliest Warrior's making that up. They do that, as we already mentioned, with a lot of like experts where they just kind of
define world class.
Right.
You can't.
Yeah, they just kind of stick that moniker on people like, oh, is he stuntman for the Gladiator team? Gladiator weapons expert.
Yeah,
you know?
Whenever we get to the Viking longsword too, we'll kind of like touch on why that might be a little made up because the sword wasn't very common, so I doubt that anyone like studied specifically in Viking longsword use. It was just like, because it's kind of like a common sword that was used by a lot of people, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I will mention he does a good job performing with the weapons, and he is big. He's like 6'6", so it's good to have like a tall Viking man.
Yeah,
on
he
there.
at least looks like he knows what he's doing, and
Yeah.
I did see that he did some stuntman work on Thor and Iron Man. So Thor, baby, ever heard of him?
If you'd like to, you can read more about Casey at IMDb or follow him on Instagram at GingerKong70.
That's funny.
Yeah. The second Viking expert is Matt Nelson, who they say teaches Viking combat techniques and that his lineage can be traced to Viking raiders from Denmark. I'm sorry, I'm cracking a smile reading that because it's like, who does he teach those to? There's like people lining up like, you can go to a college, you can go to trade school, you can go learn Viking combat techniques.
Can I read you my notes that I took on Matt Nelson here? I specifically have written not much info.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. I couldn't find anything on Matt. Like, I combed through all the legitimate websites. I found my way onto old articles and like forums, and I just couldn't find like any credible information about him. For what it's worth, he does come off as, pretty knowledgeable about Vikings, and the fact that he's not like a famous stunt performer suggests that he's either like personal friends with the producer of the show, or that maybe he holds some legitimacy. So
it could be either. Hey, I'll throw out my invitation per episode.
Yeah,
Matt Nelson, come on the show, bud.
Yeah,
come tell us what you're trained in. You know.
Matt, if you want to come on the show, hit us up on Twitter in the comments. so we can get some of your bio. I know YouTube has a very big section of like dudes who are into Viking weapons and culture. I don't know if you guys found some of those channels.
Oh yeah.
So I don't want to raise any of their ire. If you know about Matt Nelson, if you think he's legit, let us know in the comments.
No bullshit. He's probably my favorite expert on this season, maybe all of Deadliest Warrior.
Yeah.
For several reasons we'll get into, but he's just like a normal guy. He's not taking it too seriously. He's not a character.
Yeah.
I really do like him.
And he's humble. He's the most humble expert, and he's the only guy who, like, I feel like when he's talking about, so we watched the aftermath, and when he's talking about the Viking losing, like, you can tell he disagrees with it, but he's the only one handling it like an adult, where he's like, look, I think the Viking, my opinion on is it would have gone differently, but I'm sure the sim takes a lot into account. Like, he's the only one not being like, this is BS, I can't even believe this. It's just a computer. I don't care what these nerds say,
He says a phrase that I like where he like references, he's like, but I guess that's how the show is set up. Which is essentially what it is.
That's what we've been saying the whole time.
That's how the show is set up.
Matt Nelson got it before he even listened to our podcast,
Man, come on, like seriously, like I'm really asking now, Matt. Come on,
Cracks
hang on
in
with
the
us.
fourth wall are beginning to break.
Yeah.
Matt Nelson, if you're out there, hit us up, man. And don't be lying in the comments saying that you're Matt Nelson. I don't want to see that.
Yeah, we saw you, red shirt guy.
It upsets. That was me.
I know.
It upsets Craig when he sees that stuff. He's not happy about it.
If I see Matt Davis instead of Matt Nelson, we're gonna have a problem.
So, in the show, the Vikings are introduced, and in the show they say the Vikings were hardened by their cold environments where they lived. They couldn't farm, so they were forced to plunder areas of Europe. And they said Viking attack tactics were that the Vikings would dismount longships and rush ashore. I am sorry for the background noise. My dogs are here, and they have the zoomies right now, so they're doing laps around the house.
The spirit of Odin has just affected them.
It is the spirit of Loki causing mischief in our podcast here.
Ever heard of him?
Loki Odin's son? Ever heard of him, bud? So as I was saying, Viking combat tactics, the Vikings would dismount longships and rush ashore, pillage the village, kidnap the women and children as slaves, burn the village, and leave. That is how it's described on the show. So I want to turn this over to Brendan and Lucas. I'm sure both you guys have some different information here. Yeah. What does the title of Viking really mean? Is it a profession? Is it a group of people? And also, is there validity in the show's description of the Vikings as raiders and plunderers?
No, I'll just give my little quick background here, then I'll let Brendan go off the leash. And yeah, the whole they can't farm thing, that's literally what they were, is they were farmers. And they were from southern Scandinavia, sure, it's cold. And yeah, they raided and pillaged pretty much for economic gains, essentially. But I mean, at the end of the day, most of them were farmers. They all lived in these big houses with their animals, their sheep and everything else. And I mean, they get it a little bit wrong.
The idea that they couldn't grow food stuck out to me. It was like, it's like, how were there Vikings to begin with then if that terrain is so inhospitable that you can't grow food?
They portray them as these big dumb ogres essentially compared to the smart, wise, intelligent samurai. It's just that's not how it was.
Yeah.
All right. So it's kind of funny that they say that they can't grow anything and that they were forced into raiding, whereas actually one of the theories as to why the Vikings begin to raid was because there was a boom in bountiful harvests, and that created an overpopulation, which enabled a whole lot of people to go out and either find their own economic interests, quote unquote, or settle their new lands. They set up Dublin, they founded Novgorod on the Dnieper River, and they even founded the Duchy of Normandy.
Oh,
well. That was also a Viking by the name of Rulo.
Yeah, the Vikings were like prolific explorers, weren't they? I didn't do too much research, but like to my knowledge, Vikings discovered like Iceland, Greenland, and Canada.
Yeah, they called Canada Vinland.
Yeah.
I don't remember this. Yeah, weren't they one of like the first people to actually land in Canada?
Yeah.
This is true.
Yeah, I remember that from like, whatever.
And
8th
they
grade history.
there are like records of them encountering Native Americans, like they wrote about them.
Read about that in the Vinland Saga manga on store shelves today.
You know what was really weird that I found about them that I was like amazed by? Vikings, like you think of them as like dirty farmers, like raiding, covered in blood. They were known for their hygiene, is what I found. They bathed once a week, and they actually had like tweezers and like a lot of personal care stuff they made from animal bones. I thought that was like the weirdest thing because I mean, your default thing is like big, smelly ogre Viking, but apparently they had very good hygiene.
Yeah, apparently,
Interesting.
from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle or some other source, some of the English were very concerned because people were actually preferring to be with the Vikings because they didn't smell as much as the English.
The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle sounds like a newspaper that spreads on a college campus to get new recruits, if you know what I'm saying.
Probably.
Yeah. But I did have a question for you, Brendan. So I think it's Tetsuro calls Vikings reserves and plumbers who fight 1 week in a month. Do you think that's fair?
I have a specific question about that later in the episode. Yes. So why don't we save it? Why don't we save it till
All right.
then?
Okay.
Let's get into the episode here. So our first weapon set is at short range, and what we have is the katana versus the great axe. So they start with the samurai katana. The stats on it are that it's 30 inches long, 3 pounds, and is made of folded steel. In the first demonstration, the quick draw power of the katana is showcased by using 3 rolled mats. I do love when they break the ballistics gel and pig carcass formula to just pick something random like a
On brand for
Yeah.
the samurai.
like a block of wood or a cardboard target. Like this one is just the rolled mat. Like,
No way. But you know what they really demonstrated here to me? That Tetsuro didn't know what he was doing with a katana.
oh, that was Brett. Brett does the quick
Does he?
draw with the katana.
Oh no, okay,
yeah.
no. I'm thinking of there's a little section where he's Tetsuro's talking about the katana and how it's like one of the greatest weapons created by mankind.
Yeah.
And then he goes to put it away. And if he is this samurai descendant, I looked this up. He put away the sword incorrectly.
Oh.
They don't look down at their holster and put the point in. Like every kid picking up a sword at a pawn shop.
Yeah.
They do where they follow the back of the sword along the scabbard and then push it in.
Yeah.
So that they can't, or they don't have to take their eyes off of their.
I will say I didn't do any research on either warrior for this episode, but to fill a good job in the hosting role. But I have been playing Ghost of Tsushima on PlayStation 4, and I know what you're talking about because that's how I put my blade away on there.
Oh yeah, don't worry. I did my thorough research for the Viking. I played Assassin's Creed Valhalla on my PS5 this week.
And watched Thor Ragnarok with your brother. Yeah. Back on track here. So the katana showcased by using 3 rolled mats. Craig, the claim is made that the samurai had a form of killing an enemy while drawing the katana. Is that true?
Yeah, so the quick draw was actually very important to samurai. That's something that they talk about a lot when it comes to combat, how quick a samurai could draw a sword, what type of sword is going to give you the quickest draw. So almost like a gun quick draw. It's a similar idea. Obviously, it's more of a cowboy thing.
Yeah.
But that is sort of an art, a sword art, and part of the
Interesting.
samurai.
Well, for the second test, they have Brett slice downward at a stack of 4 pig carcasses, and he's able to cut through 2 of them. So I had another question for you, Craig. At this point, Tetsuro claims that katanas could cut through 1 or more human bodies in a single motion, and that there was a phrase for this test. He said, like, if it could cut through 1 body, it was known as a 1-body blade, 2-body blade. And he gets all the way up to, and in history, we hear about 3, 4-body blades. So is this like a test samurai used to perform, and is this a phrase that was used?
Yeah, so I found a good bit about blade testing. I'll say this. I found a ton of information on the katana and a lot of interesting facts, and it is way off balance with the rest of the weapons that the samurai use. But yeah, for that aspect, there's a lot to say about that. So it's actually something called tamashigiri, the art of testing blades. And it's something that's been around and is actually still around to an extent. They don't use humans anymore, but it's just the art of testing blades. It wasn't always on humans. It was on sometimes cadavers, tatami mats, which they use in the show, bamboo, things like that. And during the Sino-Japanese War in World War II, Japanese officers actually did that type of test on Allied captors as well as Chinese civilians. So relatively recently, they were still doing that with katana. And there's a famous war crime where two officers, they had raced to see who could kill 100 people with their katanas, I guess prisoners or captors during that time. So this type of blade testing on humans is within the last 100 years. So kind of crazy. But yeah, and I, sort of on that note, not to ask the only question, like tatami mat being equivalent to human bone, I don't know really how you research that. I feel like it's either not close at all to bone or it is way, way tougher than bone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's just a claim the
Actually,
show makes.
found a website on
TatamiMat.org.
No, it's swordarts.com, and it said that tatami mats, to get the consistency of bone, they would put an insert of bamboo, and the tatami mat wrapped around that bamboo would get some of a similar consistency to like an arm.
Right, because as our audience may know, if they've played it themselves, in Ghosts of Tsushima, take a shot every time I bring up the game. In Ghosts of Tsushima, there are bamboo strikes you do to build on the power of your sword, power of your striking. So, interesting.
I have something for you, Craig, that I was like, I don't know if this is true or not because I didn't look too much in the samurai, but I found that, like, you know, for the katana being like the main weapon that like you associate with samurai, that it really wasn't their first go-to weapon. It was almost kind of like a last resort in actual warfare. They preferred archery and like long range and horseback, and that was like an absolute last resort. You know, the enemy is within feet of you. Did you find anything like around that too?
Sort of, yeah. So early on, I guess going through the history of weapons that the samurai used, in the very beginning of warfare, their primary weapon was the Yumi bow. So that goes back the furthest. It's what was most often used in warfare. And they also had a naginata, or some type of polearm that they would use, and a weapon called a sasuga, which was a short-range, close-range sword that would be a secondary weapon, like a backup. So that's what they used for a long time. Eventually, that sasuga was lengthened, and that ultimately became the katana.
Interesting.
There were also these things called tachi, which were very long, probably like same size as the Yumi bow, like 7 feet, swords that were shortened, and those also became katana at some point. Now, as time progressed, both the naginata and the tachi were proved obsolete once with the introduction of gunpowder. The katana still remained. So while they didn't initially use it, it seemed like the timeline of weapons eventually moved to katana being used, up until they were banned in, the Meiji Restoration. But against like guns, they're obviously probably going to prefer like a bow.
I mean, it still just seems like a last resort, like hand-to-hand distance weapon.
Interesting.
Yeah, depending on the situation, I don't think they're going to like run at each other. No. But
yeah, they call it the samurai's primary weapon.
That's what kind of what I was getting at. Yeah, I don't think it's their primary weapon.
And I would chalk that up to just the katana being the most famous weapon, probably. Like you mentioned, you found a ton of information on it, and I think it's because it's so ingrained in our media. There's so many in anime, and I know Kill Bill is a whole movie that's basically about a girl killing people with a katana, like
the Yamato from Devil May Cry, where Virgil does his attack and then he sticks the sword, and as soon as he clicks it back in, the body falls into a bunch of pieces.
Yeah, that kind of shot, where it's ching, and then they're both standing there, and then one guy falls over. Yeah. The katana's just cool, and it's in a lot of movies. But That's fascinating to hear that the Yumi is sort of the primary weapon of the samurai.
At least and up until a certain point, until gunpowder.
Yeah,
becomes,
right,
but-
right. Okay, well, and I was also very interested to hear that those mats actually come from something. It's too bad they couldn't get some bamboo to do like an actual bamboo strike test. That would be cool.
They said, like, this is the same test they would do previously. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention about the body blade. So this is mainly speculation. So I haven't seen that phrasing of one body blade, two body blade used. I feel like that's probably just legend. Like, oh, these blades are 5 body blades. But practically, I feel like it's going to be extremely tough to cut through more than 2. Like, after
Yeah.
2, it sort of stopped in
Yeah.
a demonstration. And in practical combat, it was very rare one person got cut in half. So, we're talking like extremes. I just don't see you getting past 2 actual humans.
Just the physics of it. I mean, it's not a very heavy blade. It's only like rated at like 2 pounds or something.
Yeah.
And I mean, just
3
once you
pounds,
hit
yeah.
spine and everything, like it's got to lose moment. Like it's got to be just physically impossible.
The
for
limits
a
of human
Yeah.
strength.
It's very different, and we'll get into it here, but it's very different than like the sword the Viking has, where it's more similar to like a broadsword, where weight is just as important as like the ability to cut. The katana, I feel like, is built way more for speed because it's small, it's lighter weight. So after seeing these 2 pig carcasses get cut up, the Vikings counter, and they argue that the katana would not be able to cut through Viking chainmail. So they do test this, and probably my favorite test of the episode, where they hang a chainmail on a pig carcass. I just thought it was really funny to look at. And they have Brett swing at the pig carcass with the chainmail on it, and the sword is unable to cut through the armor. And it doesn't weigh enough that it would affect the target beneath it, right? So I have questions for all of you here, but I want to get to Craig first. I had an interesting thing. So I know the katana is a primarily slicing weapon from things that we've seen. I also noticed katanas do have a tanto point on the end. It's a specific kind of point that a lot of like knives use, modern knives. That is, and the purpose of that type of point, I thought, was to puncture body armor. So do you think the samurai could use that katana to stab through chainmail? Because I know chainmail is like not as good against thrusting as it is slicing.
Potentially. I mean, I think that's what's great about the katana is it's super, super versatile. You know what I mean? So, yeah, obviously they just test slashing. That its primary method.
Yeah.
But obviously thrusting is, a very valid technique as well. I feel like it would. I don't know enough about chainmail to really say for sure. But, yeah, obviously that would be more effective. So I don't know if it would go all the way through.
Yeah, I just was looking at that and I was like, I wonder why they don't test this thing stabbing through the armor.
I think I know why. I actually looked this up because I remember we talked about it previously.
Yeah.
The katana's downfall is it's very poor at stabbing because of that curve. It tends to like be very inefficient with stabbing. Like it bends or it like kind of jerks your hand around. Apparently it's a very poor sword for like straight on stabbing with. You're
gonna get some haters in the comments.
That's fine.
Some haters being like, "This guy sucks. The katana rules."
This is just what I researched. That if they have like an extreme angle in the bend, or like an extreme bend, like on the sword, that they're very poor for stabbing.
I bought a katana at the flea market last weekend. It was not bad at stabbing.
Hey, prove me wrong. That's just what I saw.
So I want to turn it over to Brendan and Lucas here. We'll start with Brendan. What kind of armor would a Viking usually have worn, and did the show do an accurate job at representing it?
Well, it really depends upon like what economic background that guy was from.
Okay.
Like, anybody really could have gotten up, take their wood cutting axe, just grab a cheap shield, catch a ride on somebody's long ship, and go raid something. But there was also professional soldiers known as Hersteders, or the Huskarls, which were the retainers to the Jarls. They were like the bodyguards. And they would wear chainmail. They would have the swords. They would be the people with the actual heavy military equipment.
Interesting. Okay.
Brendan pretty much nailed it. That's
Yeah.
pretty much what I had written down too. It's just based off of the pretty much background, what their intended purpose was, whether they had a little bit more money, they could afford the armor or not. The only difference is, which we'll touch on them later, is the berserkers favored more, which were kind of like the shock troops that were sent in initially, wore like some maybe like bear fur armor. They preferred that, but they were also on drugs. But yeah, it seems like if you could afford it, you wore chainmail. If you couldn't, I mean, you
went
had a
with what you
shield.
had.
Yeah, you kind of went in
Interesting.
what you had. It was, the Vikings were very diverse in like a way of, some of them had money, some of them didn't. It depended, and maybe you can go pillage and get some money and get that chainmail.
Interesting. So after these tests, they go to the Viking Great Axe, which is 5 foot long, 7 pounds, and is a wood handle with a steel blade. That's what the show says. I noticed right away the difference in the length and the weight between these two weapons, and I wondered why the longsword wasn't tested against the katana and the great axe put up against the naginata. Because if you see, the naginata is like 7 feet long, they label it, and the longsword I think is 36 inches. I have it written down here. Let me just see.
Yeah, they're around 3 feet.
So to me, 3 feet Viking longsword, 2.5 foot katana makes more sense to go up against each other, and then like 5 foot great axe and 7 foot naginata.
But they never do the like best matchups, do they?
maybe they just thought it would be more cinematic to have two swords and have a sword against an axe, and then a naginata against a sword. I don't know.
I think it just boiled down to is what weapon was. They do like that thing where like the primary weapon, what is each person like completely known for? What do you associate with them? And they always pit those against each other.
I see. So, we can argue about it, but we'll score it how it is here. So there's a notable difference between the lengths of the weapons, but they take it. It's a notable difference between 5 feet and then the axe they actually use in the testing, too.
The 5 feet is a bit exaggerated. The real axe they used was the Dane axe, or the Danish axe, was like one of the most common ones of like the actual battlefield intended axes, because they used a lot of just field axes
I
also.
see.
But it was 3 to 4 feet on average instead of 5.
Yeah.
And
I do have a question here, like, did they use one-handed axes or large two-handed axes? Because we see both in like tests and reenactments. Like, they have the great axe, which I'm assuming is like the big one, right?
Yeah, I mean, essentially both. I mean, they used whatever axes they had, but there was two-handed axes, and the smaller one-handed axes were more commonly used with the shield, which we'll cover later. But if you're saying the big great axe, the 3 to 4 foot, commonly two-handed, but the thing that comes up a lot, the axes are associated with the Vikings. It's like the weapon that you play Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you start with an axe. You think of it. They more commonly use spears. Was the most common weapon that the Vikings used.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we'll
Spears
get
were very cheap and very
essentially
available.
that's what it
Yeah.
boiled down to. Yeah, spears were cheap.
interesting. I'm sure we'll get to that when we get to the spear. That's probably why they shoehorned it into this episode, probably.
But the axes that they did
Why
use were pretty
didn't they
cool.
use a spear against the naginata? I don't know. But so Casey does the first test for the great axe, where he chops a block of wood, and then he manages to cut a ballistics shell vertically in half. And Max Geiger is like completely stoked about it.
Yeah. Well, we get the great quote.
So can the computer account for body parts leaving the body?
No, it does not, but maybe we'll do something custom.
Puts a 1 in the Excel sheet.
Our narrator, he did not do something custom.
I am so fascinated. Like, I want to see like what the sim is, and like, did Max Geiger sit down and do like a little bit of code that day to get organs flying out of bodies? And did it get used for the rest of like all the other matchups? Like, I would love to see that, because he makes mention of that in further episodes where we get into guns and explosives, where he basically admits to the camera not in these many words, but says like, yeah, so the sim is not built for these things, so I gotta basically modify it. We'll see the exact quote in like future episodes, but it's clear that the sim was designed for like people with swords fighting each other and not as we said, it's based on a Slytherin Studios game called History Channel's Greatest Battles of Rome, and I think we joked about it in an earlier episode. Like, how do you modify a Spetsnaz with a Sega shotgun into like a game about Roman legionnaires?
We're just gonna put in we assume the Spetsnaz is like a Spartan, so we'll just put a Spartan warrior in.
Yeah,
damage infinity.
Yeah,
like I think. I understand maybe like not having limbs, but armor is such a big part of not just this matchup, but like the weapon test where
Yeah.
they both don't do a great job against armor. So if you don't really have a system for like disabling armor, if it's just like a kill or not a kill, like armor and like trying to get around it is so important to this matchup. It's hard to imagine it without representing it.
Here's one of my objections to this episode. It says at the beginning that both of their gear weighs 65 pounds, but the weight difference between the average samurai and Viking is insane. It's like like the Viking's like 180 or something, and the samurai's like 130.
He's 135. Yeah,
like you cut that guy's body weight in half, and that's how much gear he's carrying. Like that's pretty significant.
Well, speaking of armor, the next test they do with the Great Axe is that they put it up against the samurai helmet, and the axe deflects right off the helmet, does very little damage. Although I will say, probably delivering like a bigger concussion to the person that's wearing it than like a katana slash would onto armor. Craig, what was a samurai's armor typically made of, and did the show accurately represent it?
I did not research the armor, so I don't know what it's made of. But
it says steel and leather on the show. So they did have steel weapons, so I imagine the armor was probably steel plate.
I'll go with that. No, I mean, from what I do think Deadliest does a good job of recreating the weapons, except for the bow with the Apache. Right. But like when it comes to like the armor, I think I saw it was like a Spike.com exclusive, like the armor for Deadliest Warrior, where he like, it sounds like a cool job where he has to make all these ancient weapons.
Yeah.
So, I imagine they put a lot of time and effort to replicating it with the exact methods they had at that time.
I think they bring that guy on. I think he's an expert. He falls into the category of like people that just work for the show. He is an expert for Teddy Roosevelt, I think, and he takes a lot of pleasure in bringing out the Gatling gun in that episode because he gets to recreate it. So, yeah, that guy's pretty interesting. We need to get him on the pod.
Yeah,
anybody we can.
The maintenance man. But yeah, I guess I'll save my comment for the edge.
Okay. So, speaking of the edge, that's where we're on. So the experts are initially torn between the two weapons. So this was weird. This only happens a couple times on this show, and I don't think it happens again after this. They're torn on the weapons, so they say, take it to the sim and let like the sim decide. If you notice, they did that in They did it in Spartan vs. Ninja, I think, and then they do it again in Apache Gladiator, where Jeff says, like, well, what's the sim say about it? And for this one, Max, they say, plugs the Great Axe and the Katana into the computer, into the sim, and the sim says that the Great Axe has the edge. Yet, in the final results of the episode, the Katana gets, I think, like 3 or 4 more kills than the Great Axe. I just thought that was interesting. It's not the first time or the last time that like they give the edge to something that gets less kills, but it is like the first time they say like the sim is giving something the edge, and then the sim, it doesn't follow suit in like the final encounter.
They cover their own asses where they do this stupid phrase that I hate. There they go, well, when you put together the total package,
right?
It changes the... it's just BS.
So they end up giving the edge to the Great Axe, as I said, or the sim does. So I want to ask you guys, let's start with Brendan, and I'll go round table here. Do you guys agree with the edge?
Yeah. Big ol' axe. It's simple.
Bringing a lot of lethality into the mix.
Yeah, it was very effective for breaking shield walls and for digging around those shields. You can get a lot of energy behind those swings.
Yeah. Craig, what do you think about the edge?
I do agree with it. I think the katana is more versatile, and they would probably be like, if you're talking just like blade to blade, I think a samurai would probably smoke a Viking. But in this particular matchup, both weapons are pretty ineffective against the armor. However, the axe gives you the added momentum and like blunt force. So even if you're able to block it or it goes against your armor, the downward momentum is, you're not going to get that with the katana going against chainmail. So I think for that alone, that would give the Viking the edge in this.
Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm just kind of on the same page. Just kind of the weight factor, essentially, because both are armored up pretty much head to toe. And you know, both were pretty ineffective against the armor. But, you know, I'd rather have the thing at the end of the day that maybe I can go clean up my field with. Cut some corn.
I'll say this about the edge. Normally, I would say I would give the edge to the katana because it's faster. I think what makes me lean toward the great axe is that it's the warrior that has it. I just think in close range, like the Viking is, again, like 5'11" and 180 pounds. The samurai is 5'3", 135. Like him bringing that axe down on the samurai it's gonna hurt. Like even if the steel, you know, bounces off or whatever, like it's gonna hurt. It's gonna like daze him at least. So I do end up agreeing with the edge, but simply because of like the size difference between these guys and then seeing what the swords are able to do, or the sword and the axe. You know,
I always picture the older brother just holding like the Viking's the older brother, and he's holding the samurai's head, and he's just swinging the katana back and forth, missing. He's like, "You can't get me. You can't get me."
Of course, those sizes, like I understand that like samurais and Vikings came in all different shapes and sizes, but I keep bringing those up because that's what's going into the computer. So that's what matters to the results of the show, right?
Yeah. What's interesting to me is the Vikings were from pretty much like a 1500 BC was like one of their bigger areas, and the samurais were from like, you know what, like 15 to like 17 AD were some of their like big points. That was just the region that they lived in and the average height. But the Vikings
yeah,
were even from like way back when you think when people weren't as like tall as we are now.
Well, it also goes into what we brought up in the first episode, which is that Deadliest Warriors representing like romanticized versions of these things. And so the pop culture analysis of like the Viking is that he's this giant, you know, he's a big giant Viking dude. I'm thinking of Joe Rogan talking about the mountain on Game of Thrones, where he's like, Jamie, pull up a picture of this guy, this bodybuilder. Some guys are just huge.
Think of the power.
I almost feel like 5'3" for like, I have 1500 AD written down. I feel like 5'3" is still like too short for 1500 AD though. Like I feel like they're like underestimating the samurai height a little bit.
So,
well, I'll mention one real quick. This is going to be a theme throughout the episode. They keep making like short jokes and borderline like racial jokes about the samurai. Like throughout the show, they're constantly like, "This is your little tiny samurai. He's not gonna get around this thing." which at face value, okay, they may be established early on as a short samurai, but we'll get to maybe another comment that I think goes a little bit further in that direction of a little distasteful.
I think I know what you're talking about, and I do have it written down because it's one of the cringier moments of the episode. So for now, between short range and mid range, they do a little coverage on the Viking. They say that both warriors began training during their childhood. The Vikings are portrayed as brutes who prized strength and ferocity, while the samurai are portrayed as academics studying poetry and philosophy alongside combat and martial arts. So I want to start with Brendan and Lucas. How accurate is that assessment of Vikings, that their society was based like the strongest survive and they prize being like ferocious?
Well, Scandinavian society in that era was very violent. but they definitely had a lot of academic, merit to them. If you just read a lot of the sagas, they do a lot of world building. There's a lot of philosophy in what we can believe is the contemporary mythology, pre-Christianization. They have a lot of good writing and other such things. So, and even their main patron god, Odin, was a god of intelligence as well. So they definitely valued that just as much as they did martial prowess.
Yeah, we talked about their longships and how far they were able to sail and navigate. I mean, it's not necessarily a dumb brute that can read the stars and navigate like across the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, longships are actually a marvel of shipbuilding because they're multi-layered planks and they're resin and fat coated to make it waterproof, and they really allowed the Vikings to go wherever they want and allowed them to just spread so much across all of Europe.
And also, as you brought up, like their mythology too is very rich and full of a lot of interesting imagery and analogies about life and philosophy. So definitely not just a brutal warrior society. Do you have anything to contribute, Lucas?
Yeah, this episode, I mean, as I mentioned before, it kind of paints like the Viking as like the big dumb brute and the samurai as like the well-educated, smart warrior. I think both are kind of somewhere in the middle. I'm sure there was some dumb Vikings, but there was also some very smart Vikings. And I think, the Vikings, like everyone kind of almost thinks like they were one group of people. It was like different clans, very widespread, that were classified as the Vikings. I mean, they raided each other. They were big enough to do that. And there was, it's pretty much like every economic group would like existed in the Vikings, essentially. There was poor people, there was rich people, there was a little bit of everything. And then I think even just the samurais too, they're all projected as these noble, perfect warriors, every single one of them.
I can hear just the disdain
I know
in
you're
your
smiling
voice.
over there.
I can hear the disdain, just like, ugh.
I mean, the samurai, from what I could see, started as like tax collectors, and a lot of them were actually kind of corrupt, and they worked for whoever the richest person was, essentially. Before, I mean, there was a lot of them that worked at like noble guard and stuff too, but a lot of people were trained as samurais that just kind of worked for like the money, essentially, and they traveled to whoever wanted to pay them the most. I mean, 10 to 15% of men in Japan were samurais. So, I mean, you take 10%, even 15% of any population, you're going to get kind of a wide variety, a little bit of everything. Maybe some dumb guys, maybe some smart guys, maybe some noble guys, maybe some not so noble guys.
Speaking on the samurai, I wanted to kick it to Craig about the accuracy of the portrayal here. Samurais are also academics and poets, philosophers. How well educated were the samurai? Like, what was their place in Japanese feudal society?
Yeah, I mean, they're very analogous to the military. So one of the first things I saw is I was like, I saw the statistic that about 10% of Japanese society at one point were samurai. And I looked up the U.S. military population in the United States, and it was like 10%. And much like the samurai, with the U.S. military, you'll get some good people, some bad people, some people just doing it for the money, some people. So
that's an awesome coincidence.
When I wrote that note, that was the exact same thing I was thinking about. I was like, our military today, because for any viewers that didn't know, we have some people in our like friend group and everything that were in the military, including myself, and you get a little bit of everything in there.
Yeah. So obviously a little more complicated because you have like the government of Japan morphs so much over those 800 maybe years of the samurai. So it's hard to say like their allegiance, but just like the Vikings, there were multiple clans. They were, they had a code of ethics that they followed, but again, not everyone necessarily adhered to that. There wasn't a handbook. So yeah, I think if there's any criticism of how the samurai are presented, it's that it is oversimplified, but also it's like a 45-minute show. So I understand.
Right.
Yeah. I give you the romanticized version of each.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like these parts of this show because I feel like this podcast is all about like waxing nostalgia, poking fun at Deadliest Warrior, but then also taking some time because the show has to present very generalized versions of all these things. Like, I think if there's anything, like, a Viking and a samurai is such a broad term describing so many thousands of different individual human beings, and so it's always cool when we get to do a little deep dive research into this stuff. And it's not as entertaining for the Spike TV audience, but I think it gets pretty fascinating. So with that, let's move on to some entertaining blood and guts, man, at mid-range. Mid-range. Yeah. Oh, I did want to mention, we brought this up earlier, and I said I'd come back to it. So Tetsuro, before they start mid-range, takes a shot at the Army Reserve and compares the Vikings to the Army Reserve and says they're plumbers who fight one weekend a month. How often did Vikings see combat?
Well, it really depends on if you were just a random churl or if you were a Herseer or a Huskarl who was bodyguarding the Jarl and who was off on campaign.
Yeah.
It would really depend.
Jarl Bargroff. Sorry, I had to.
I can't think of a faster way to anger American citizens
Right,
on an American TV show than insult the Army Reserve.
Shout out to the Army Reserve. Leave a like. So going into mid-range, Tetsuro and Matt Nelson discuss their warriors' respective codes of honor. Tetsuro claims that samurai lived by a strict code of honor, and Matt claims that Vikings believed there was no room for honor on the battlefield and that it was all about survival at any cost. So, Craig, can you tell us? You told us a little bit about Bushido. Can you tell us a little bit about like the honor code that samurais followed?
Yeah. So the thing with the honor code too is it's probably not that different. Like the idea that like they had no way out, and that's as I mentioned before, something that
it's like, is it the Jedi code?
Yeah. Yeah. So. I mean, samurai, I do think that a lot of what you see in terms of like Bushido probably wasn't what really happened. You know, they have maybe like, oh, here are the rules. Kind of like at work, you have like rules, and you have, okay, this is what we really do. I mean, I honestly didn't find a lot about samurai would never attack a guy who's running away. Like, there's all kinds of different samurai, and they lasted for hundreds of years. I believe that there probably was not a ton of as much honor as you might have thought, you know, where they were like, oh, he plays dirty, you know. I don't think there was honestly a ton of that.
Yeah, interesting. And Lucas, did Vikings have a code of honor?
I mean, as far as I know, I'm not really sure. I didn't really find any like specific code of honor or anything in my.
Actually, pretty interesting. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
there we go. Brendan's got this.
There's an Icelandic record of the saga of the Jomsvikings, and the Jomsvikings were, of course, Vikings from a certain settlement on the coast of Poland called Jomsborg, and it reads that no man must run from an inferior opponent, Jomsvikings to avenge one another as brothers, no man to indicate fear by speech regardless of events, plunder to be held in common on pain of expulsion, no one to stir up contention, no spreading of rumors, the leader to disseminate all news, no man to have a woman within the fortress, no one to be absent more than 3 days, and the leader to have final say in any dispute over kinslaying, which may occurred outside the Jomsviking Brotherhood.
Interesting. So they did have a little code of law going on.
But
Let
I
me
think it
translate.
probably depended upon like
Sure.
who they actually were. Of course, with the Jomsvikings, they had this, but
And of course, a lot of the responsibility in that code falls upon the Jarl. So you can have a different styles of Jarl, of course.
Let me translate to that like American language, pretty much. Be a man and don't be a douche. That's what that sounded like to me.
And don't bring the women in the house, man. If we're hanging out, don't bring the ladies around. They just get in the way. Yeah. So the samurai at mid-range bring the naginata, which is 7 feet long, 4 pounds, with a steel blade with a wood shaft. They say that these are first used by monks in monastery temples. Now, your job wasn't to research monks, Craig. Did you see anything about that? Building on that, what's some of the history of the naginata?
Sure. So they were used by a lot of different parties. I believe I did see the monks were one of them. What could we consider the naginata was created around early 900, so that could be maybe the earliest you would see that type of weapon. It was commonly used against cavalry, and it's thought to have inspired leg armor because a lot of times they would take it and target legs of cavalrymen, so that was a common use for it. And it was eventually replaced by the Yari spear as a polearm following the introduction of the matchlock pistol. So, I mean, I don't entirely maybe follow the correlation between the pistol and then I guess we got to replace the naginata. Maybe like a spear is like quicker.
Yeah.
But that I did see stuff that it was replaced because of the pistol. Some other interesting facts about the naginata. So, while samurai were at home, as you might expect, women were expected to keep up the house. But samurai class women were actually trained in self-defense with the naginata. So they trained with this thing, and it actually created a stereotype where it's thought that women use pole arms or spears. So it's a woman's weapon.
Okay.
Because they would commonly train with this. So besides monks, women
and then some very, very secure with their masculinity samurai were like, I don't use a naginata because that's for chicks.
Yeah,
I was really curious if you were gonna like reference that too, because that's exactly the same thing that I found that I had written down here, which I thought was like really interesting. I mean, it's like a really long, almost like unwieldy weapon for like home defense to like protect your family.
Yeah,
I thought that was strange almost.
Well, it can keep if you're a smaller person, you can keep a bigger guy at a distance with a weapon.
I guess that's
like
true
that.
too.
So for the test, they start off with a ballistics gel. Brett is testing out the naginata, and he clips a piece of skull off of the ballistics gel. He then slashes it through the face and stabs it through the heart. Both Max and Jeff separately claim that it's the fastest weapon they've seen to date.
Max says
That part of his head just doesn't exist anymore.
He's holding it in his hand.
yeah.
And then Casey points out that it wouldn't cut through the Viking helmet, but they don't test it. So
I don't think it would.
Yeah.
I have a gripe with this test. I think whatever fake skull they used inside that had to be like some type of foam.
Yeah,
or
you had a
something.
theory that the skull in that test is made out of foam.
I mean,
I don't know. You watch it and judge it for yourself, people.
I mean, if they used, like, what do they use to like, make a skull? I mean, plastic or like, I could see maybe plastic or something, but like, or like plaster or something.
Yeah.
However, like they do that cut and it's really clean. It's impressive cut, but it's like too smooth. And if you look at the skull, it almost looks like foam to me or something.
Would a target, like a human target, would it cut clean through a skull?
That's what I'm kind of
Right,
getting at.
yeah.
I think it would kind of hit the hard bone of the skull, and if it did, it would like crack it, or it wouldn't be like clean like that.
Yeah, it would definitely kill you, but it was just like cutting butter.
Yeah.
Literal
Yeah,
butter.
right. We've brought up like the ballistics gel being like
Jell-O.
kind of an inferior thing to like it's meant to test bullets and kinetic objects rather than like kinetic projectiles rather than like
Blades.
an edged weapon. Yeah, because it does cut through. I mean, it cuts through the guy's jaw and like teeth too. And I don't know as though getting slashed in the face with a naginata would probably hurt very much, but I don't know as though it would crack like through your face. Maybe I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, there's somebody who says
You can't see it because the blade is so sharp and so fine, but if you feel that the rib cage is broken, he's internally bleeding right now.
I'm like, what does that mean? And then Jeff like pokes a hole with his finger
Oh,
through the ballistic
yes,
shell
in the
torso.
stab,
Because I
yes.
played that back and I was like, what the fuck did that mean?
I do. Okay, I know what you're talking. That's where he
Yeah,
stabs.
he
it, like,
stabs
straight
him in the
through it.
heart.
Yeah.
yeah.
And then he just pushes his finger through the dummy.
So that was the
So
silly part.
then they bring out the Viking longsword. And the Viking longsword, 36 inches, so 3 feet, 3 pounds, and is a double-edged steel blade. Now, Casey comes in, decapitates this ballistics gel with 3 swings. Well, it's 2 swings and like a stab through the neck. And they spend all of this time. I swear they give so much screen time to them freaking out about how great the Naginata is. They test the longsword for like 30 seconds and then immediately are like, all right, edge longsword. That was good. So I wanted to ask you guys, Lucas, can you tell me about the longsword a little bit?
Yeah. It was it wasn't just a Viking exclusive sword. I'm going to butcher this name. I found that it was the Carolingian era sword.
Carolingian?
Yeah. And it was just kind of like, kind of almost like your medieval era looking sword where it's just a little cross at the bottom with a straight long sword. And it's around like 3 feet, maybe a bit shorter. But it was actually a rarely used weapon. I think I touched on this earlier at the beginning of the episode. It was very, very expensive to make and very expensive for any Viking to buy. So it was pretty much saved for kind of like real high class, real rich Vikings in a way. And it really wasn't a common weapon used in warfare. But, I mean, if it was, I mean, they probably, had the money to get the full get up. They had their chainmail, they had their sword.
What I'm getting a lot from you guys is that like samurai, although they differed and had different clans, were a certain class of people, like a certain economic class in a feudal society, whereas Vikings seem to be from different classes. I'm sure like the Jarl would go in.
Literally just use it to mean pirate.
Yeah.
So it's just whoever wants to go out and raid, you're a Viking, no matter if you're, a noble, a soldier, or just
I'm
somebody
sure.
who wants money.
I'm sure if you're the Jarl, you're going in there in, full clad iron armor with a long sword and shield, and if you're just a farmer who's trying to make some extra money or kidnap a couple ladies, like you do, then you go in with what you have. Right? Like what you can find around the homestead.
Well, that's why the axe was so popular, because it was like a working tool. But the sword was essentially, if you had one on your hip, it was like a status symbol almost. And that's why a lot of them were actually... I think the misconception that a lot of them use swords is a lot of like the higher class were buried with their swords or decorative swords.
That's a great point.
Or when they did their Viking funeral, they were put with their sword. Like
the farming guy, it was like, you can toss... You can toss Floki there and just like the pit,
it was like
just
the
kind of
equivalent
kick him in there
of like buying a Ferrari today. It's like, honey, I made it. I bought a sword. Bury me with it.
Do you have anything to add to the longsword, Brendan?
Yeah, actually, there's something very interesting about the construction with the longsword in comparison to the katana. The Viking longsword actually was constructed using a pattern welding technique, which a lot of people would recognize as Damascus steel. And what they do is they had this very low carbon content rod, and they would twist higher carbon content rods around it to make this pattern. And then they would, forge it into the shape of the blade. And this is very similar to the same techniques that the Japanese used to forge their katanas in sort of a laminate... What?
This is on his fourth Smirnoff Ice.
Hey, I'm having fun with this podcast.
I can't wait till we get to the end and I ask, do you agree with the result?
I'm just gearing up.
Lucas is he's getting his mead.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm having fun.
So you were saying it's Damascus steel, the Viking longsword.
Yeah. Well, technically false Damascus, because the real Damascus
comes from
it was from a different area.
Okay, so what kind of advantage did that give the sword? Is it just make it look cool, or did it make it stronger?
It actually made it both stronger and a bit more flexible, because the softer, lower carbon content steel in the center would give it some flex and allow it to absorb shock a bit easier. The Japanese also had low carbon content steel on the inside curve of their katanas to also allow for that shock absorption.
Interesting.
What's crazy, I'm sure they don't have accurate representation of these swords at all on the show, but whenever he does the stab with the long sword, whenever he stabs it in the first time, the sword actually like bows up quite
Yeah.
a bit and then pokes through, which I thought was kind of cool in a way, like that it didn't bust, essentially.
Yeah. Flexibility. Well, they end up giving the edge to the longsword because of how brutal the demonstration is, how much damage it does. So I'll start with opposite sides here this time. Lucas, do you agree with the edge to the longsword over the naginata?
I do. I think the longsword would be very effective paired with the shield. The naginata, it's a very interesting and kind of cool weapon. It's one of those ones that I feel like someone would have to be very specifically trained with that weapon to be effective with it, or it might be a bit unwieldy. I don't know. I like the construction of the longsword, and I thought the test with it was pretty cool. Yeah, I'll agree with the edge there.
Interesting. Craig, do you agree with the edge of given to the longsword?
No, for a couple of reasons. So, first off, Max agrees with that statement that there's a lot more devastation with the naginata, or
It's
he went
the
through a lot more
fastest.
than naginata,
Yeah.
and like, it kills a kill. Like, obviously, we don't think that naginata is going to slice through a skull like it did, but that's still a killing blow. And if you get your skull sliced in half like that, it doesn't matter if your body's eviscerated from
Right.
a longsword, So I think that's kind of a dumb point. And like, wouldn't the reach and speed of a naginata make it more valuable in the samurai's hands? So I didn't double check the length, but I'm just thinking a polearm like that versus a sword probably has way more reach.
The naginata gets listed as 7 feet in length, and the Viking longsword is 3 feet.
Oh, so that's like huge, especially how fast that they can.
Yeah,
move with
the
a
distance
trained
thing you're
samurai.
bringing up is why I question like so much why the swords weren't pitted against each other, and then why like a naginata isn't put up against either like a spear or a great axe.
I think it's
It kills
just
the
because
kill.
so they could give equal advantages.
Right.
Yeah. For the numbers. Part of me, like, I don't want to just start questioning everything, but do they just do all of these tests in a vacuum and then give the edges arbitrarily? Like, how often do they actually pit these together?
I
Right.
can see that. Yeah, like they're not actually testing them like against each other back to back. They just test all the weapons individually and then pair them as they see
I
fit.
think if you watch it on screen, I do think they test it. I do think they test them against each other specifically. My theory about the show is that it's scripted, like that it's obviously some of it's scripted, but what I'm trying to say is I think it's a story put together from front to back, and the only question that remains for me is whether there's even a simulation or not. Like that either someone is writing two different narratives into the story, like, okay, let's leave room for one guy to win and for the other guy to win, and then the computer resolves it, or is there really no sim and the whole thing is just kind of written out like all right, we're going to have brace yourselves for this one, guys. We're going to have the Spetsnaz win. People are going to be so mad.
They're going to be so excited.
Brendan, what did you think about the edge?
I have to agree with Craig here. I think that the naginata deserve the edge.
Yeah.
Pretty much on how the show presents it. If the longsword was paired with the shield, I think that would, make me think that would deserve the edge. But just going up against the longsword, I think the naginata deserve that.
As it stands, I would give the naginata the edge because of the reach advantage that's shown. But I would argue I would like to see a longsword and a shield versus a katana. And then I would like to see the naginata up against like the great axe, and then see, because I think the longsword and shield combo gets the edge there in my my Deadliest Warrior fan fiction. And I think the naginata probably gets an edge. I mean, you could argue because the great axe is pretty lethal, but I think the naginata would have a little bit of a reach advantage on the great axe still. So I don't know. We'll move on here. Let's get into long range. So the Viking spear, you guys said the spear is a very common weapon amongst the Vikings. The one they showcase is 7 foot long, 6 pounds, wood shaft with a steel head. They show Vikings using spears both as melee weapons and throwing weapons in like the reenactment and the narration, but they only test it as a throwing weapon. It's specifically his long-range weapon. So they test the spear by having Casey throw it into some wooden targets at 25 feet. They do one-handed, and then they do two, of course. The Viking team makes the claim that penetrating the wood, which the spear does,
8 inches of penetration.
yeah, they do say 8 inches of penetration.
So we're looking at about 8 inches of penetration there. Look how thick that wood is.
Means that it could penetrate steel armor. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. Well, how many inches of wood equivocates penetration of steel? And I just want to say that Casey finishes it up by throwing 2 spears at one time, and then Casey and Matt share a really awkward fist bump. Casey like pushes his way past like Jeff or Max, and then or Matt pushes his way past like Jeff or Max and like holds a fist up, and like Casey finally notices him, is like, yeah.
I kind of remember that.
It stuck out to me as a fun moment. So I guess I'm going to turn it over to Brendan and Luke here. Did Vikings use... I mean, it's sort of a silly question.
Yes.
The answer is kind of intuitive. Did Vikings use spears this way, or did they have like other long-range weapons at their disposal? Because I just want to add, they specifically show in one of the reenactments, there's a random shot of a Viking shooting a deer with a bow. Like the Viking sees a deer and like draws back his bow. So, but they don't give him the bow in the episode. Any thoughts?
It's almost like giving the Viking the bow just wouldn't have made sense with giving the samurai the Yumi. So I feel like that's why they cut it.
Yeah.
Because
did they use spears this way? Did they throw them, and did they have other long-range weapons?
From what I could find, they used bows, they used slings. They did occasionally throw spears. The spear, again, we touched on earlier, was the most common Viking weapon because it was the cheapest to manufacture. And they actually had different types of spears. The one that they showcase in the show that they throw is actually a stabbing spear, where it has the point, and then it has the little like T intersection down at the bottom with more blades on it. That was more commonly used as stabbing. The ones that they would actually use to throw were more common with like the Spartan javelin almost, as, you know, just a visual representation. They were a little bit of a shorter tip and a little bit of a shorter spear. But from what I've seen, Vikings could carry like 2, 3 on them, and they might throw 1 or 2 of them, but they would always maintain at least 1 in their hands to pretty much like stab with. And they would commonly use it almost like the Spartans did, where they would wield it with one hand and use the shield in the other and kind of stab, and then hold the shield up and stab. For what I could see, or they could use it two-handed if they, their shield broke or something. But I think more commonly it was used as a stabbing weapon than like a throwing. It's kind of a poor like representation of a long distance weapon for the Vikings, because they had better ones that they could have used, like the bow, or don't
give them the sling,
I don't
because
like slings.
that's the kiss of death on Deadliest Warrior.
I mean, they could have just given them a bow, but then like a bow versus bow long range, what do you give the edge to? They both just shoot arrows, I mean, the Yumi bow is, I will say, I'm very impressed by the Yumi bow, especially looking it up.
Right.
But I mean,
Brendan, do you have anything to add about the Viking spear?
Well, I was very skeptical about if anybody actually threw 2 spears at once. Or if
I
that
tried
was
looking that up too. Yeah.
And I found it.
Nice.
Apparently, a king by the name of Olaf Tryggvason, who is said to be the great-grandson of the first king of Norway, Harald Fairhair, is said to have thrown 2 javelins at once with ambidextrous skill.
Interesting.
So, I mean, that is from a saga, so whether it actually happened or if it's true is kind of up for debate.
Well,
so it's a one-off event that created this misconception.
We do know that Deadliest Warrior does that. We'll see that, like, the Green Berets, they give them the E tool later on, and that is from a very specific story and event that happened. They do that with warriors sometimes, so I wouldn't be shocked if that story you found, Brendan, is the sole inspiration for them just giving the Viking the
It probably is.
Yeah.
How does
I also
Casey
guess-
do it then? If it's so tough that only like a legend can do it, he
Well,
does a decent job.
Yeah, he does, but I would point out Casey's throwing from like, as always, like 10 feet away.
Also,
and
that might not be the first cut.
Hey, I will
yeah,
say-
that's true. That might
Yeah.
not be the first cut, and the left one goes pretty off target. It does
does.
hit the stump, but
I will say, if you gave me 2 spears and told me to throw even at 2 logs 10 feet away, it would probably take me like 100 tries. So, I mean, pretty good shot by Casey there.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I
he
doubt
is-
anyone...
he is a Viking longsword expert.
Oh, yeah. I doubt anyone actually used that technique, like, legitimately.
Yeah.
like,
But a thing
in
that I'm
warfare.
really interested that they left out was the use of a throwing string that the Vikings used. It is just a piece of string you'd wrap around the spear and you'd wrap around your finger, and of course you throw it, and that allowed you to throw just a little bit farther.
Yeah.
because it would allow the spear to keep accelerating even as it left your hand.
Wow.
So they did use that. Even the Romans used that a bit.
And that would have given him a little
darts
bit better
and
range,
javelins.
too,
Yeah.
even. Which, in long range, I mean, having the superior range is such a big deal. So,
How'd they come up with that? I mean, they're dumb brutes.
right. So, we get into the samurai Yumi bow. 7 feet tall, 2 pounds, bamboo, wood, and rattan. I don't know. The number one thing I wanted to point out is that they use the same damn sound effect as the Apache bow. Yeah, that's stupid.
They do that, and they do, when he pulls it back, they do this, like, bow, like, wood creaking sound,
Oh
too.
my
that I love
god!
As he pulls it back.
Now that I've noticed all the fake sound effects they do in the actual tests, like I can't not hear them every time.
And I just love it.
Yeah.
I know it's so fake, but
Yeah,
I just love
it's-
it.
You don't
they're
notice that as a
funny.
kid. As a kid, you're like,
Yeah,
oh.
yeah,
Oh, that's the sound it really makes.
they're funny. So I will point out this test is very shady. So they have Tetsuru, who they describe as a master of, samurai archery. They have him shoot a variety of arrows from what they claim to be 45 feet away. They don't even try to hide it. Like it's a shot of it's like a shot of the ground that says like 45 feet. No one's even in frame. It's just a shot of the number. And then they cut to the wide shot and he's clearly like
10.
like 10 or
maybe
20
15.
feet away. So
Well, also, I don't know if you're going to get to this, but in the introduction for the Yumi bow, Drew Sky, he makes a comment and says,
True Sky.
he says,
His pseudonym.
he says,
And the Yumi, taller than the archer who aimed it.
which I think is another race joke. Like, it's 7 feet tall. It's going to be like taller than most. Yeah, most people. So that's why I'm like, okay. Like,
Yikes.
yeah, you little yikes there.
Yeah.
Were
He
they
didn't say
actually
that-
7 feet tall like the real ones? I didn't look that up at all.
Yeah, they're big. The Naginata's 7 feet tall. Like,
Yeah, and
it
there was
doesn't
like
say that
Itachi
about.
I mentioned, which is 7 feet tall. So they were just all into like these really grand weapons.
Yeah. So the test is very shady, as I said. I brought up earlier New Sensei, which is a
I will
channel
link the
on
video
YouTube.
in the description.
Yeah, video link, description below. He points out in this video that Tetsuro is drawing the bow in an improper style, that he's not making any impressive shots for someone who's labeled as a Zen archery master. He's not... His accuracy, they're trying to edit it to look cooler than it really is, but it's for someone who would be a master in that archery, which there are modern people that do Zen archery today. You can look it up online. He's not doing anything very impressive.
Well, even to prove a point, they have someone who is like not an archery master replicate what he does in the show also.
Yeah,
in that video
that's
too,
true.
Where he calls the shots and shoots it from like the 20, maybe 20 feet away.
Right.
Then proves that
Left
it's really
pectoral.
not hard. Yeah.
Right rib cage.
Yeah, Brendan,
Arrow to the throat.
Didn't you point out that like he just contradicts himself on the actual direction?
Yeah, he says, what is it?
Yeah.
Right arm, sword arm.
Yeah.
And then he says right pectoral, but he shoots left pectoral. Or
Yeah.
it was the other way
Whatever
around,
direction
I
he's
think.
going, he's wrong. Yeah.
There's a lot of cuts in that too, and there's extra arrows stuck in the dummies.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and random shots, so you can tell they shot and edited it very
That's one
heavily.
thing New Sensei says too is there's never a shot where an arrow leaves his bow and enters a target. It's
Yeah.
always cut like back and forth.
Yeah.
Shout out to the editors on that show.
Yeah.
You know?
Like, Jesus Christ, what we have to work
I
on.
honestly suspect Tetsuro had never fired a bow before, probably. Or, like, maybe knew what they were. And, like, they brought him on and they handed him that, and they're like, you have to test one weapon, my dude. We're going to say you're an archery master, and people will believe it because you're Japanese.
There's
You know?
little kids watching this show.
And he's like a Canadian dude who's never fired a bow, and he's like, all right.
I mean, hey, it worked for us.
Yeah.
when we were kids.
Right. So they then test the Yumi. This is like one of the most iconic shots of Deadliest Warrior, firing at the gel head with the Viking helmet on it. They give it eyeballs. And in this test, Tetsuro, quote unquote, hits both eyes from 20 feet. It's never shown whether he actually makes the shots. And the close-up afterward shows both eyes have been removed from the target and the arrows are artificially moved to the center of the eyeballs. Famous shot of the show. They have it in the intro video too, like when the theme song plays at the beginning. Not completely staged. And Jeff Damelin points out that like that shot is from 20 feet, and he's like, to me that's not impressive, because like if the Viking is 20 feet away from you, like, and you've got the Yumi in your hand drawing back, like you're probably in trouble, right? Like, I know they make the argument all the time, like, oh, well, I wouldn't just be standing there. But, like, if a Viking is charging at you and he's closed the distance that much and you still got your bow in your hand, like, are you really going to hit him in the eyeball? I don't know. Maybe you could, but...
I mean, you get maybe one shot also. And, I mean, like, imagine a guy running at you. How much, like, feet does he cover in 1 second?
Yeah.
I mean, you could probably cover a good, like, if you're hauling, like, ass, you could probably cover, like,
well,
7 feet
in
like,
D&D... 5th edition, the average speed of a character is 30 feet per second, unless you're in medium or heavy armor, which is
20 feet a second,
which is 20 feet per second. You could probably cover 20 feet in a second.
All right, we're going outside. There's going to be a live video. I'm just kidding.
Craig, edit that in. It's like that Mega 64 bit. Craig, since there's a lot of shadiness going on here, can you tell us about the Yumi bow and the samurai's relationship to archery?
Yes and no. So the Yumi is certainly real. They use it a ton, but I found like almost no information about it. It's just like a bow. It's a big bow. Like nothing I really saw that was outstanding or interesting. It's kind of just a bow.
It's a very celebrated bow though throughout history. Like it's one of the most like, you know, ceremonial, well-crafted bows. What everyone says about it. The only thing I could find was a 26 to 35 pull strength on it, and that it was effective at about 150 to 200 meters at max.
That's more than I found. So
yeah, that was. I mean, yeah, there wasn't much on it for like how spectacular this bow is supposed to be. Which I will say, I don't want to sound like condescending against it. Like I was pretty impressed by it, but yeah, there's not much info on it.
Yeah. Well, for the edge, Jeff wants to give the edge to the spear for the aforementioned reasons. He wasn't impressed with the accuracy until it got in close range. And Max gives it to the Yumi, claiming that the samurai has a greater skill with the bow, like showcasing that the samurai is a better, like, skilled fighter overall. And he also does like a little mockery dance of the Viking holding two spears.
He single-handedly hijacks the show and gives it to the edge. Like I don't think Armand. There's another party that doesn't agree with him either, and he's just like, I'm giving the edge to the samurai.
Yeah,
like
yeah. He's like, I disagree entirely. You know,
Max is like, okay.
So. Well, as I said, Max Geiger is the God Emperor of this show. Unless the sim is fake, in which case the God Emperor is a off-screen God Emperor. If the sim is real, Max Geiger is the man running the show.
Max is going to be on his deathbed one day, clinging. You know, it's like 2063, and then like. The machine will be beeping with. Like,
I hope
the
we
last
gave you enough
things.
years there, Max.
He goes, "The sim is fake."
It's like George R.R. Martin releasing the manuscripts for Winds of Winter and stuff, like finally on his deathbed, just like here they are.
Yeah.
Daenerys dies. So we'll make this quick because I have a feeling I have a feeling we're probably all in agreement here. Craig, do you agree with the edge given to the Yumi bow, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think a more realistic swap would be to pair the shield with the longsword, have the spear be a special weapon because it's a polearm and can be thrown, and then have like the Viking bow be the long range weapon. But that being said, I think it would have just been boring having bow versus bow. So from a show standpoint, I understand why they didn't do the bow.
They could have done like an English longbow versus a Yumi bow, but then they would have had to have someone on who actually knew Eastern archery.
English longbows, like that's like
Yeah, sorry.
300 years.
Yeah.
White ass Anglo-Saxon guy fighting a Yumi bow.
That was a misnomer. I meant, whatever bow the Viking had.
Tally ho! Let me shoot my bow.
Oi, mate! You want to try this? You want to try this thing out?
Try this and
Try this and. Brandon, what do you think about the edge between the bow and the spear?
I agree. I'd rather have a bow than a spear.
Yeah, I think the Yumi's got superior range probably, and also it looks like they're just giving the Viking like 2 spears at max when he's fighting in the sim, whereas the samurai has who knows how many arrows on him. So, Luke, what do you think about the edge?
Yeah, pretty much unanimous. I think the spear's kind of misrepresented for what type of weapon it really is, and I mean, the samurais use the bow very, very effectively in combat from what I've seen.
Yeah.
From very far distance, and that was the preferred method of fighting. I mean, it's a badass bow.
Yeah. Well, moving on to special weapons, we have the Viking shield, 3 feet in diameter, 6 pounds, and is wood with iron boss. Once again, continuing from the Spartan and the Ninja, they are testing a shield as an offensive weapon and not simply in combination with another more lethal weapon. I would also note that no samurai weapons are tested against the shield except the Kanabo club, so we don't know, I think a naginata and a katana would probably not fare well against the shield, but we don't know.
I don't think they have enough weight to do damage. The
Yeah.
shield they use on the show,
We'll get to that in a second.
it's a bad representation. It's just what I'm going to throw out there.
What I want to say, I wanted to say before I asked you guys about the shield and how accurate it is, I think it's frustrating and I think it's worth bringing up because I honestly think this matchup right here is the reason the Viking loses on the episode, because they give him the shield and then they give the samurai an extra weapon. And to me, a shield is not a weapon. We had this discussion in the first episode, but you can use a shield as a weapon. It's like a hammer or a screwdriver. You can use it as a weapon, but it's a tool. A shield is a piece of armor to be used in conjunction with something else.
You would have to be last resort. All of your weapons are gone or broken to try to swing your shield or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very dumb special weapons pick. Compared to the Spartan shield, which I think was made to maybe be offensive or work in conjunction, get concussive force, as our buddy Walshy put it, has the force of a space shuttle launch according to the show.
45 Gs.
Yeah. The Viking shield, it's not offensive anyway. It's like saying a bulletproof vest is a weapon.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I mean, you could maybe use this shield offensively.
Take out
but
a plate of Kevlar and just smack somebody.
You could also do that. Yeah,
it's a piece of wood with a piece of metal stuck on. It's multiple pieces of wood with a piece of metal stuck on it. Yes, you can smack somebody in the face with that thing and hurt them, but to then give the samurai a giant club for the sole purpose, the only reason they gave him that was the sole purpose of being able to break that shield. And I just think, well, either the Vikings should get another weapon, a fourth weapon, or they just shouldn't have a fourth weapon and just say, the Vikings also got a shield and the samurai does not. We'll get more into that. Brendan and Lucas, what can you tell me about the Viking shield? Is the one we see an accurate representation?
Lucas?
No. No, I think they use a very like slap together, like what can we grab from Home Depot model. The real shield, I mean, it's still not the most impressive shield that you'll see on the show. They did use a little round shield that was like, 2 to 3 feet around. And it was just kind of, it was wood. It was linden wood, which I kind of tried to look up what that was just a minute ago here. I'm not 100% sure what linden wood is. It says it's multiple species of trees, but
Wood
it's
from linden, of course.
yeah. I mean,
Come on.
it's apparently a very hard wood that was good at like not splintering.
LOL.
Look how thick that wood is.
But they would cover that in kind of like a layer of leather, and then they would put iron bands across it, and they would put iron bands around the outside. I mean, the ones they use on the show don't look like that at all. They kind of just look like slapped together wood.
Yeah.
And
And I noticed,
is a
like,
shield.
when they're doing demonstrations with an axe and with smacking the iron boss, they use a different shield than the one they actually do the test with that they break. So, do you have anything to add, Brendan?
Yeah, if the shield that they used actually had a steel or even a leather rim or any rim at all, it probably would not have broken.
Yeah.
Or at least the splintering would have been very little.
Yeah, they put these little tiny like iron. They claim iron bands across it, but the outside of the thing should have been rimmed in iron, which would have held it together.
The one they tested on does not have any rimming on it at all.
No,
The one
and,
they used to smack the test dummy did.
Yes.
But the one that they tested on
Yup.
did not.
they do that constantly. Where like the one that they test hitting it against
It's
is like a
the
cheap
War Club,
representation.
the War Club controversy.
Yeah. Well, the big elephant in the room is the fact that when he's holding the shield, he's holding like a little mini axe in his hand. Also, that he's he hits the dummy with the shield and brings the little axe over and chops at the neck. They don't address that miniature axe that he's using at all, like the little war axe.
Yeah. Well. So, Craig, Tetsuro, it's at this point, makes probably the most memorable thing for me about this episode. It's always stood out. He claims that samurais don't use shields because they see it as a manifestation of weakness, which is a bold claim coming from a guy who's covered head to toe in steel plate armor, but it's a manifestation of weakness. He then says in the code of Bushido, there is a saying, go into battle determined to die and you will survive. Go into battle hoping to live and surely you shall not. Craig, 2 questions for you. Is it true that samurais did not use shields? And 2, is this an actual saying in Bushido?
Well, so I haven't dove totally deep into Bushido to say for sure. I haven't seen that. It sort of does sound like the piercing buffalo effect, where if you heard that, you'd say that's an ancient Japanese or Eastern
Right.
saying. So, but then again, maybe that's because it is. So I can't say for sure whether or not that was a Bushido-esque saying. As for shields, I did not see a record of a shield, but I'm sure they use something.
Yeah.
I don't think they had anything against using a shield in their code of ethics.
Might just be because they're covered in armor, and like I know a lot of their weapons are 2-handed weapons. Like the katana, isn't it like a thing in Japanese tradition? Like katana's a 2-handed sword, and you're not supposed to use it with like one hand.
Yeah.
From what I found, they occasionally did use shields. It wasn't against their code or anything, but just most of them preferred not to.
It just doesn't make sense with their weapon
Yeah,
set.
I think
They're gigantic weapons.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're giant weapons. Yeah. Look at this guy using a shield. Friggin' loser.
Nerd.
Yeah, nerd. So we get into the samurai special weapon, which is the Kanabo club. 4 feet. So the stats they give on this are that it's 4 feet tall and 15 pounds. And it's made of oak with iron studs. Now, the one Brett brings over for the test, he hands it to Jeff. And, he hands it to Jeff, and Jeff's like, oh, this is heavier than I thought. And Brett says that the one they use in the testing is 30 pounds, which is why that weight stuck out in my mind when I was watching it. And I'm like, 30 pounds is a lot for like somebody to just be carrying around with them.
130-pound man.
Right?
55 pounds of armor
Yeah.
on also.
Yeah, and he's just carrying this giant club with him for, what if I run into a Viking, you know?
Did they actually use I know
So-
we're getting to that.
So
This is
what
like
I'll
the-
ask
I've been looking
first,
forward to this.
Craig, Tetsuro claims that the Kanabo is the weapon carried by Japanese demons. Is that true? Just a piece of mythology there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to just kind of get into the history.
Yeah, you can get into it a little bit. I want to know, they market the Kanabo as the anti-armor and anti-shield weapon that samurai carried. Yeah, give us a little bit of background on the Kanabo.
Well, there's not much. In my research, this should tell you something. One of the top results when I searched Kanabo was the Deadliest Warrior wiki.
Oh my god.
So that's how little's out there. I haven't found evidence of people using a Kanabo or, and the main thing was that it's used by Oni or Japanese demons. And there's an old saying that like giving a Kanabo to an Oni, so basically like the same thing as adding fuel to a fire is the equivalent. So it's tied a lot to imagery, and it's kind of iconic with the samurai, but I don't know if it was used practically. Again, pointing to the idea that Deadliest Warrior is not showing samurai as they actually were, but as they were, as you imagine them to be.
They're perceived.
Which, if that's the case, God bless them. I think a Kanabo is a necessary weapon. It's like a badass, iconic weapon. But if you look at the demonstrations, even like when they're showing it in like the flashbacks, whatever, the actual samurai fighting on the show, I was thinking like, could you imagine wielding that thing? It's so heavy. Like, you just get fucked up. Like,
swinging around a 30-pound club at a guy who's coming at you with a sword.
Yeah.
Like,
You miss one swing, you're done.
yeah. Yep. You get one swing, basically. You got to catch him at the right time, too. So, that's interesting. So, it was real. Samurai did use it, probably. Maybe.
Honestly, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Well, one other thing that's kind of cool.
Was it used in combat?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Maybe it existed, like different versions of it. Because you'll see what's kind of cool about the Kanabo, the idea of it, is there's all kinds of different builds and styles. So there's probably like a club you could say, oh, it's a Kanabo. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
But really, when you're talking about the Samurai Kanabo, you're thinking of like 30-pound gigantic thing you're like throwing around. So something from like Sekiro,
Yeah. By the way, Deadliest Warrior Wiki, if you're a fan of the show, get us on there. Make an account and get us on there. I don't want to make our own entries. I don't want to pull a snake blocker here. Yeah. You guys need to get us on the Deadliest Warrior Wiki.
The Kanabo, what it reminds me of that I always think is really funny, because it just looks like a giant baseball bat, essentially, with like little metal nubs on it. And, whenever they were first around, some of the samurai were used as like tax collectors. It kind of reminds me of like the mafia guy in the suit going, "Hey, you owe the boss money."
This is a nice farm here. Be ashamed if somebody smashed it up.
That's in a couple episodes. Don't get ahead of yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, we're getting there.
There's going to be so many bad Italian accents done on that episode.
Oh,
How often do you think Gabagoo is going to get said on that episode? Anyways, so they tested against a cow femur. It smashes through that. But the more important test is they tested against the Viking shield. And Matt Nelson drops the line.
That's the biggest piece of wood your samurai has ever seen.
Guys are just delusional.
Well, this is what we're gonna find out. You're either gonna.
It's followed by an awkward silence, except Max does like a big fake laugh because you can probably tell, like, he probably sympathizes with Matt and dropping like a bad joke. And
He's been there.
you can see the visible cringe on Matt's face if you watch it and like zoom in. He turns like beet red and he's like, "Oh man."
My theory is that the show was like,
Yeah.
you got to make this more entertaining, man.
Yeah.
You're kind of a boring expert. And he's like, all right, I'm going to crack a joke today.
Yeah.
And he said that, and he was like,
He's like, Asian people got small penises. Am I right? He's looking around the room and it's like, am I right? Come on, guys.
He's at the bar with his buddies the night before. I'm just, I'm not a good expert. I need to get more in there. But you should make a dick joke.
Yeah, he's workshopping into his friends, and they're like, I don't know, that sounds a bit racist.
Yeah.
So they test the Kanabo, and it causes, honestly, like it smacks the shield, and it causes like a small break on one side of it. You could easily keep using that shield against like a katana or arrows or whatever, but
the Kanabo falls apart slightly.
The iron studs start popping out of it. And I also wanted to note that this is being swung by a 5'8" really buff dude, and it's a 30-pound club. In the sim, you have a 15-pound club, because I'm assuming the stats they give are what's going into the sim. You have a 15-pound club being swung by a 5'3" man who was probably muscular, but is not going to be the levels of like modern buff that Brett is in this episode.
I think if I had Viking chainmail, I could probably take a Kanabo shot to like the arm.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
From a samurai.
From my mom swinging it,
See, everyone says that like the cow femur test is like real impressive, but I think if you strap down a bone like that, you could take like a regular
anything would have
baseball
cut
bat.
through
that.
I
mean, you could probably smash through that pretty easily. Like it's one of those things that looks really impressive, but kind of isn't, like if you think about it.
So they give the edge to the Kanabo because it's more lethal than the shield. I mean, I agree in the premise of what the show gives us. I agree that the Kanabo gets the edge. I just have a very big problem with them bringing the shield on as a weapon. I just don't. Can a shield help you get a kill? Can you kill someone with a shield? Yes.
How many kills does it get?
The shield?
The shield.
77.
The shield gets 77, and the Kanabo gets 100. So that's the biggest differential between any two weapons on here, and that's why I kind of make such a big deal about it, because I feel like Vikings getting shafted quite a bit.
Didn't the Viking lose by like 23 kills?
Yeah, it's
22.
It's the third closest matchup in the show. I do have that stat written down.
The Yumi bow does get,
and that's including the Back for Blood. It's the third closest in season 1.
Yeah.
So.
What was gonna? Here, you can continue. I forgot.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say, like, do we agree with the edge here? Just gonna kind of put it out there to you guys, because I feel like you have similar thoughts.
I would like them to define what special weapons means, because when I think special weapons,
just a fourth category.
Yeah, I think of, even though it wasn't classified as one, a ninja black egg is like, in my opinion, a de facto special weapon.
Something that's unique to that warrior,
like
right?
a secondary grenade in Call of Duty. That is what a special weapon is, not like some. Oh, we don't know what this category is, So
Monodon.
Give him a shield.
I would drop a grenade when he went down.
Like, you brought up a great point that the Spartan shield, although I don't think it should be classified as like a weapon, the Spartan shield is a special thing that is like unique to that kind of hoplite from Greece. Sort of an iconic thing, whereas the Viking shield is just like a shield of that era. It's not particularly iconic, like, especially when you have something like a great axe on this episode, which to me is like a Viking-esque weapon that would be more particular to them. I think it's the whole category of special weapons, I think, is completely arbitrary. They just throw that on as a fourth category because they're like long, medium, and close. What else can we do? Special.
Yeah.
I get where they come from too sometimes, where how do you take like a generic thing like, oh, Vikings that could have existed through all whatever, like economic classes that could have had tons of different weapons, and how do you pick like 4 weapons to definitively like this is what they used? But I think they have a really good knack sometimes of picking really dumb, obscure weapons.
Yeah.
One other thing with the Kanabo test is Jeff puts that thing on the one guy's arm when he's testing the Kanabo, and he's like, this is going to measure the pitch, yaw, and roll of this weapon. I feel like this was a relic from a time when the show was trying to be educational, like Mythbusters, and they're like, this is going to be showed in classrooms.
Yeah.
We never get any of that data. The
Yeah.
only numbers we get is that 11,000 Newton force from Casey breaking that 2x4.
Honestly, the 2x4 breaking was one of the most impressive things, I think.
Probably the biggest downfall of the show, besides the fact that they run out of warriors, is that they as the seasons go on, they err more towards this like educational thing, like trying to make it more like factual. And man, leave that to us. Leave that to our hour-and-a-half podcast, and not to the 45-minute show that's on Spike TV. Like, just show us more cheesy crap, you know? So, yeah, getting into the results, Samurai ends up winning. It's 522 kills to 478. The Katana gets 3 more kills than the Great Axe. It's 137 versus 134. Longsword does get more kills than the Naginata, like 4 more kills. But the big differences come between the Yumi bow and the spear, and then the Kanabo and the shield. So the Yumi gets 114 kills. Spear gets 92. Kanabo gets 100. Shield gets 77. So to me, I almost kind of, I guess I'll say this. The theses of the show, I think, comes out of Jeff's mouth right after the results, where Jeff says, superior skills, superior weaponry, the best man wins. And I think that's what they're trying to sell you, is that, well, the samurai's educated, he's intelligent, he's also fast, and his weapons are of a higher caliber than the Vikings. And I think that that's total bunk. I think the reason they lose on this episode is solely because of they give the Viking a spear instead of an actual long-range weapon. And then they don't give the Viking a weapon in a 4th category. Like, they give him the shield against the club, which is a weapon that I don't even know if samurai used that in fighting. They just kind of pull it out because they're like, oh, crap, the samurai doesn't have a shield, and that's a huge disadvantage. Let's give him a club so he can break that shield, and, like, it gets 100 kills.
It's too convenient.
Yeah. So I definitely see why people are mad about this episode, and I want to kick it over to Brendan for our grievance relievance section.
You know what? I want my own grievance relievance too after Brendan.
Maybe you've had a little too much mead for that, but let's kick it over to Brendan for the grievance relievance section. Brendan, as our guest, get off your chest what you need to get off, man.
They did my boy dirty.
Yeah.
They just did him dirty. Just the format of the show, I think, lost the Viking the match.
Mm-hmm. Do you think he could have just been given some better weapons there at the end?
Yeah, like I was even looking on like alternatives, and they could have given him a halberd, which Vikings called the Atgir. There was, what is it? Different types of axes that they could use. Like they could use the hand axe or something, and have the sword be a special weapon.
Yeah, use that in conjunction with the shield, because they do have in the William Wallace episode, the Tarj and Dirk combination. So they bring on William Wallace's shield, but they use it in combination with a knife. I'm assuming to make it more lethal, right? I think the Viking... I'm not saying a samurai couldn't beat a Viking, obviously, because this show is just goofy, right? The premise of the show is pretty goofy. But I think in this particular case, like, the Viking does get done a little dirty. That's kind of what I picked up watching it, is that they kind of cheat him at long range by giving him a throwing spear, and then they give him a shield as a 4th weapon. And I think my man might have done better if they'd given him something else. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, just wait till we get to the Celt and to Napoleon. I got some words for that.
I'm excited already. I guess let's see here. Oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention before I handed it over to you guys was we get the humblest loss in Deadliest Warrior history.
That is what I remember most about this episode, actually.
Yeah, the Vikings are the only team that loses that gives like a humble response. And Matt Nelson says, perhaps we relied a little bit too much on brute force. And I wrote in my notes, this is the only non-crybaby answer that a losing team has ever given.
There's another moment, too, that I think he shines, where we sort of touched on it. Whenever, like, one of the first tests with the katana, rather than being like the Spartan people, like, yeah, we're gonna be moving around.
Yeah.
Like, he says, the katana is a slashing weapon. Chainmail specifically protects against slashes.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, that's a cogent point.
Right.
An educated response.
Yeah. A lot better than like, missed me. You're not going to get me, you know?
My grievance with this episode is they portray the samurai as this like deadly fast, like super quick. They keep using the terminology fast.
Lightning fast dealer of death.
Yeah.
Lightning fast, quick. I mean, this guy is wearing 55 pounds of gear. He is
65 pounds of gear.
Well, just
Even
the
more.
armor alone, from what I like looked up, weighed 55 pounds, and then the sword, the bow, and say he's carrying that club and everything. This man is not lightning quick. I'm sorry. That's like my biggest. That's my grievance relievance for this episode. This guy would not be quick. Yeah, with all of this armor on, with all of this, they keep saying, "Oh, you just can't, speed kills." They keep saying that. They say that in the aftermath too. That's like the theme of the aftermath is the speed kills. This guy is not fast if he's wearing this much armor and carrying this much equipment. That is my grievance relievance for this episode.
Craig, what were your thoughts on the results?
I mean, I would agree with it. I think if you asked me this question independent of this show, I would probably say a samurai. I do like this matchup for the Barry Jacobson apples and oranges comparison.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a good example. Maybe not the thesis of the results, but I think the idea of the matchup. It reminds me of, there's this famous martial artist. It might have been Bruce Lee. I think I heard this on Joe Rogan Experience, so maybe that's what I'm talking about. But it was a story of this martial artist who, he was some sort of Eastern culture, and they went up against, in a contest, talking about MMA, boxing. And they said they had these masters of all these Eastern martial artists going up against a pure American boxer. And they said that was probably the hardest martial art to fight against, just because of all, I don't know enough about fighting to say for sure. But they said that was the toughest one. That's kind of what this reminded me of, and why it's a good matchup, is you have good old-fashioned brute force versus very deliberate, a deliberate trained warrior. And that's, I think, what makes this interesting, is that dynamic.
Say speed. I dare you.
I will say I stand behind the points I made that I think they did the Viking a little dirty. I will say this was a funner episode in that, I knew who won, obviously, but if you're watching this for the first time, it's hard to tell who's going to win. I feel like the last couple of episodes we've done here, Spartan Ninja and then Apache Gladiator, at least for me, I was like, this is obvious to me, like, who's going to win. Like, one guy is, Spartan Ninja. It's like Spartan's covered head to toe in armor. The ninja's not going to be able to touch him. And then with the Apache Gladiator, it's like every gladiator weapon is like a made up entertainment weapon, like the scissor and the trident and the net. And I'm like, the Apache's just bringing like good stuff, savage like equipment. And this one is a lot closer. Like, hard to tell if you're the first time watching this. Like, they're both armored. They both bring some like really good tools to the fight, and maybe there's a breakaway dimension where the Viking won this, and maybe there's a breakaway dimension where it came out a tie, 50-50.
Yeah. I enjoyed this one. I like this episode more than like I remember, because this was one of those ones that I just didn't remember too much watching back when it like first aired and everything. And the more I got into this one, the more I enjoyed it. And I do think maybe the Viking could have come on top in a lot of scenarios, but I mean the Samurai could have easily also. I do feel like this is almost a pretty good matchup in a way where it could go either way.
Yeah. Brandon, do you have anything more to say on the results?
Now that, 15 years have passed and the salt has gotten out of my system, I definitely appreciate this episode a lot more. Even researching some stuff on the Samurai, I can really, appreciate how close this match is and how, really interesting both of these two, historical figures really were.
Yeah. All right. Well, we appreciate you guys joining us
I
today.
did have a couple final thoughts.
Oh,
if I can-
okay.
if I can
Me
jump
too.
in.
I got one final thought after Craig.
Hold off on that outro because Craig and Lucas got something to say. Craig T.
So, real quick, did you guys notice in the final fight video the Vikings wearing like khakis?
Yes,
There's a very
I
clear
just said that
scene.
earlier.
we watched it like right before this, and Lucas was like, "Look at his khakis."
Yeah.
That is one of the worst reenactments, and I think this episode had some of the worst props in it too. Like the Viking wall that he like busts through is a bunch of sticks.
The
And-
one Viking, I've debated
Yeah.
even putting this in. It's like a chick with like a mustache. Like, did you see this? I'm gonna put
Please.
this in the edit.
viewers, you'll see that on the
Clearly a
edit.
chick.
You'll see that picture on the edit. It's worth looking
Oh,
at.
dude.
Yeah.
And there's also one of the Japanese guys. You see him so much. He's like the one who's out of armor and he's in like orange robes. He has the fakest looking like facial hair. It's like glued on.
Yeah.
It looks so bad.
Brendan, did the Vikings wear dickies?
Yeah, they've actually recently found archaeological evidence.
Yeah. And the one other thing I wanted to say is if you want to learn more about Vikings, Assassin's Creed has these things called Discovery Tours, which they're very cool. They're kind of hard to explain. I imagine every Assassin's Creed there is like hundreds of hours of research that 99.99% of the player base has no idea. Like, of like recreating historical monuments and accuracy. So for the past few games, they did one for Egypt and Greece. They have these discovery tours where you walk around the world and you do these little nodules and they say, hey, here's this famous building. Here's what we think it would look like. We recreated it. And here's this aspect of life, of like Viking life or whatever. They're going to come out with one for Valhalla for the Vikings pretty soon. It's free if you have Valhalla, and I think it's probably like $20 if you want to buy it separate. But
Interesting.
really cool way to learn more.
So if you're a gamer and you're into Vikings, check it out. Did you have a final remark, Lucas?
Yeah, I got two though.
All right.
I'd like to formally add Tetsuro Shigematsu to one of the most obnoxious hosts in
our
this season.
our bottom 10.
Yeah, little too obnoxious. But I had one little quick plug at the end that it's actually nothing that we're associated with. But I did watch a video because I referenced the Viking Berserkers a lot, and we touched on them and talked about them a little bit. The infographic show actually did a very good matchup between the Viking Berserker and the Japanese samurai that I thought was really interesting, really worth a watch if you wanted to go over to that.
All
And,
right.
yeah.
Anybody else got any last thoughts?
Not really.
Well, thank you for joining us this week, Brendan. It was nice having you on. We'll have to have you on again, sir.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
An honor.
It's an honor to die alongside you, brother. All right, so coming at you from the Fight Club in the beautiful rolling hills of the Steel City of Pittsburgh, make sure you guys leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to Xenu Games, subscribe to Green Dice Productions while you're at it, too. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for watching, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for watching, guys.
Or listening.
We'll see you next time on the Deadliest Warrior podcast for Pirate versus Knight.